Well, this is Frank Lewis and Pastor Frank, and welcome to another program in which I'm going to be talking to you about attachment and lack of attachment. Today, we're going to be discussing lack of attachment. What happens when you don't end up having a good attachment with your child? It's going to cause pain. And behavioral scientists call this pain that comes from lack of attachment pain. And attachment pain is very, very difficult to feel. It is very hard. It's a part of what happens when we don't have good attachment and we don't have life-giving relationships. So I'm going to be talking to you today about attachment pain. And attachment pain comes when we have less than a secure attachment. When we are children and we were raised by parents that did not attach to us properly, what is going to happen is going to cause attachment pain. And what's really interesting about this is that brain scientists have discovered and tell us that there's an attachment center in the brain. God created us for relationships. So He has put an attachment center in the brain that drives us to relationships or drives us to attachment. See, the problem is that if we don't have relationships, if we're not in relationship, didn't God say that He wanted Adam and Eve to populate the earth? He said it was not good for man to be alone. Yes, He did. And so what we realize is that we were created for relationships. When we're not in relationships, we're in pain. And that is not a place where any of us want to be, because attachment pain is very, very painful. And so what happens is that we try to avoid this pain, this attachment pain. We try to avoid it in any way we can. And one of the ways we try to avoid it is we try to avoid it by causing ourselves to not feel it. The problem is it's always with us. And so what do we end up doing? We end up going to painkillers. We end up trying to push it away, trying to get away from it, but eventually we end up going to painkillers. What kind of painkillers are we talking about? Sex, drugs, alcohol. We're talking about too much working too hard, food addiction, all kinds of addictions. Why? Because the attachment center in the brain is designed by God to push us, to drive us to relationships. However, if we do not have life-giving relationship, what's a life-giving relationship? A life-giving relationship is one in which we have an emotional connection. The problem is we learned as children that we couldn't express our emotions. And so most people get into relationship and they can't express their emotions. So they're living in a non-life-giving relationship. They're living where they can't be truly who God created them to be. They're living in a way that they're living in pain. Because if I can't be who I was truly created by God to be, then I'm going to have pain. Why? Because I'm not the person that God created me to be. As I told you in the last week, I'm living behind a facade and a mask. I don't want anybody to know who I really am, because I'd be afraid that if they really knew who I really was, they would leave me. And so I don't want that, but it causes me pain. It caused me a lot of pain, I want to tell you for sure. But it's causing all of you pain. Why? Because we didn't get to express our emotions. So we have unresolved emotional pain. You've heard me talk about that so much. And what is the behavioral scientists call this type of pain is attachment pain. They put a name to it. And because the attachment center drives us to attach. Now, if we don't attach to people, if we don't attach in relationship, we're going to attach. We're going to attach to something else. What could that be? It could be a bottle. It could be a person of the opposite sex that we think we have a relationship with, but it's not life-giving, so we still stay in the pain. It could be drugs. It could be any type of activity that keeps us from feeling this attachment pain. Now, see, what happens with adults is they are able to use all these different painkillers and to be able to kill the attachment pain, or to numb it, or to make it go away for a short period of time. It's only a temporary fix, people. It's only a temporary fix. It's not going to fix anything. The only way to get attachment pain dealt with is to deal with the unresolved pain of childhood. And so that's what we need to do. And that's important. That's vitally important. That's why I wrote this book, as a matter of fact. I wrote this book because I had immense pain. I had attachment pain. I had unresolved emotional pain, and I was a mess. And so I wrote this book because I discovered, by the leading of the Lord, how to be able to end up with healing of unresolved emotional pain. And because I was having these problems and I had this kind of life, what ended up happening is I needed to be healed emotionally. So I discovered how God sets us up to be able to heal emotionally, and I wrote it in this book. I not only have this book, and you can buy this book on Amazon, I would certainly get over there and do that, but I also have a website called relationshipsrevealed.org, and in that website, I list the other books that I'm writing, and I list I have information there, and I also have a Want Help button and a Learn More button, and that will be very important. If you want help, you just press that button, and it'll alert me through my email. And when I get that, I'll get in touch with you and provide the help you need. One of the things that I also have is a YouTube channel, and the YouTube channel is a channel that is titled Relationship Revealed with Pastor Frank Lewis. Relationships Revealed with Pastor Frank Lewis. You can go there. I have 21 videos on marriage. I'm going to, you're going to see this video next week. I will have 4 or 5 on parenting, and I have testimonies of people and how they've been emotionally healed. So let's get back to, however, attachment pain, because most adults, most human beings are in attachment pain, because unless you were securely, as I talked last week, unless you were securely attached, you're going to be in attachment pain. And I'm going to prove that to you in just a little bit. But I first of all want to talk about what happens when children are not securely attached, when they are insecurely attached. They're afraid to share their emotions. What happens to them? Well, they're in attachment pain. They're going to be in attachment pain. And so what do small children do when they're in attachment pain? Well, they have to attach to something that gives them some comfort. They can't attach to mom and dad because mom and dad don't give them comfort. So they attach to toys. They attach to a blanket. They attach to maybe games. They attach to perhaps even video games in the beginning. Not so much for a young child. They'll attach to a blanket, and you've seen that. You've seen your different children will attach to a blanket, and you don't want that kind of thing happening because it's telling you they're hurting. They are in attachment pain. But what happens when they get a little older? Well, when they get a little older, what happens is that they end up attaching to video games in particular, because parents give them video games, they give them a device, And what ends up happening is they get attached to it. It gives them a relief from the attachment pain. How does it do that? Well, they play the game, and it gives them a good feeling because they're accomplishing something in the game or whatever the game is all about, but the game becomes addictive. And a lot of parents use a game to be a babysitter for their children, or to get their children to do something so the parents can do whatever they want to do. I've seen that in so many situations. And what happens is the children get addicted, not just attached, they get addicted to video games. And that's not going to solve the problem, but they'll scream and yell if you try to take it away from them. I'll tell you right now they will. And so they grow a little bit older and they get into adolescence. And what do adolescents do to solve the pain problem? What they do is they do a lot of adrenaline type of things. They end up doing things that cause adrenaline. They end up skateboarding or they end up doing things that cause adrenaline rushes. And they're usually dangerous, and they're usually kind of on the fringe of what's safe and what's sound and what's a good idea. But they'll do that because they're pushing the limits, because they want that adrenaline rush, because that adrenaline rush will give them a feeling that's different from the attachment pain. Now, they also may adolescents start getting into smoking marijuana. That leads to other drugs. They may end up getting into pornography. That gives them a rush. It gives them dopamine hit. And what ends up happening, that's a neurochemical that's produced in the brain, and they end up self-soothing. Young boys end up doing that. Young girls may end up becoming promiscuous. And, that's not going to solve the problem either, but it's going to cause them to end up feeling less attachment pain. Anything that will lessen the attachment pain is what children, adolescents, and even young adults, they'll get into video games, kind of like the adolescents and the children. They'll also get into sex, drugs, and also alcohol. A lot of kids on college campuses drink too much. Why? Because they've got attachment pain. They think it's just having a good time. It's being driven by their attachment center. And so they'll get into sex, they'll get into drugs, they'll get into alcohol. They will end up doing things that cause lessening of the attachment pain. And so the whole the attachment center drives us as children, as adolescents, young children, adolescents, and even young adults, drives us into doing these things that will lessen the attachment pain. As adults, I already shared with you, they get into painkillers. So what happens is that this attachment center will cause us attached to something. Either we'll attach to people, as God created us to do, or we'll attach to something that will lessen the pain. And we don't really realize even that that's what's driving us. But that is what's driving us, because God wanted, it was always the idea of God, how He designed our brains was to attach to people. He wants us to have loving, emotionally connected relationships. Problem is, most people can't get emotionally connected relationships, so they're always living in pain. The reason they can't get emotionally connected relationships is because they have never been attached to properly. They were never bonded. They never built the trust. They never built the attachment, the emotional connection. So they don't know, what emotional connection is. I have met so many people that have no idea what emotional connection is. It's just amazing to me, but it's true. Because the Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Well, people, adults, raising children are causing those children to not have the proper foundation, and because the adults have been raised without strong, secure attachments, they've been raised with insecure attachments, and so they're ending up with pain, attachment pain. They're doing all these things to try to solve the attachment pain problem, never getting to the root, never really realizing that the cure for attachment pain is to get into a relationship which you can have an emotional connection. The problem is this: if you have never really known how to have an emotional connection, how are you going to get into one? Well, we're going to talk about that later, but suffice it to say that if you don't know what an emotional connection is and you've never experienced it, you're probably not going to be able to create it in your current relationship. I'll show you how in weeks ahead, how to have an strong emotional relationship. But right now, the problem is that if you don't know how to have that, you're going to be struggling with attachment pain. Now, I'm going to spend the next part of this program talking to you about attachment theory. John Bowlby was a developmental psychologist who came up with attachment theory. And attachment theory is basically that we have 4 different types of attachment. The parents attach to their children in 4 different ways, and they end up with their children having 4 different types of ways that they attached. And that is secure attachment. I don't believe there's many secure attachments. I've been doing this for too long to realize that there's many secure attachments. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. Parents don't know how to be able to raise children properly. The devil's fighting the whole situation of secure attachment. I don't think there's too many. Then there's the dismissive. We're going to talk about the dismissive. We're going to talk about the next style, attachment style, if you will. First one is dismissive. Second one is distracted. We're going to talk about that one, and the third one is disorganized. So we're now going to get into that. John Bowlby, as I said, came up with this theory, and it has now been added to by many, many different developmental psychologists, and it gets stronger, and you're going to see yourself in it. So look for where you fit, but let's first start talking about the dismissive. Why does a child become dismissive in their way that they were attached? Why are they dismissive because of the way that they were attached? Well, it's because of this. If a child wants to attach to their parents and their parents push them aside, they don't want to attach, the child has no opportunity to attach, that child will actually keep trying to attach, driven by the attachment center, keep trying to attach, but will eventually give up. Why will they give up? Because they don't want that disappointment. Those feelings of disappointment are so great that the child just gives up. And when they give up, what ends up happening is they end up then shutting down, pulling into themselves, and they become dismissives. What are dismissives? They're people who have a very hard time being with other people. They have a hard time connecting with other people. Why? Because they never could connect with their parents, so they have a very hard time connecting with other people. And here's the situation, though. Dismissives are usually people that have such a hard time connecting with people. They like connecting with things other than people. And so they are the people in our world that are programmers. They connect with numbers. They're accountants. They connect with anything but people. And so they do those kinds of jobs. They are people that do not easily connect with other people. Now, they are what we call dismissives. And the next group that Bowlby came up with was distracted. This is people whose parents, the child wanted to attach with their parents, but their parents would attach with them sometimes, but not other times. So it was not very secure attachment would be they would attach most of the time. Distracteds were attached to part of the time and then not attached to a part of the time. So they really do not, they're always looking, they're not secure. Neither is the dismissive. The dismissive is very insecure with people. The distracted person is very insecure and always looking for somebody to validate them, somebody to attach to them. They're the kind of people that walk into the room and take all the air out of the room because it's all about them. It's all about them and what they need. It's not about you and what you need. It's about them because they are so insecure that they don't know when to attach, when not to attach, when somebody's going to attach with them or not attach with them. And so they're people. They get their energy from people, but they are always very insecure. So they love people, or they need people, let's put it that way. So they make teachers, they make secretaries, assistants, executive assistants. They are very much into the helping professions, medical help. They're nurses, they're pediatricians, they're those kinds of people. They're the helping people. And they will make sure that they get what they need by helping, by trying to make other people's lives better. But they also are people that are, like I said, insecure. So what's interesting is you can have a nurse that is a prenatal nurse or a child nurse, or you can have a nurse that's an ICU nurse, and they will have, one will be a dismissive and one will be a distracted. And so that can happen. Now, what's also interesting is that you can have a doctor that can be a pediatrician and be a distracted, or you can have a doctor that's a surgeon and ends up being a dismissive. So now the third group is the disorganized. And the disorganized group is what I was. And the disorganized person is a person that could not attach to their parents because they were afraid of their parent. They were afraid of the parent. In other words, they didn't want to even try to attach. So they are disorganized in their attachment. And what that means is they were so afraid of their parents that they didn't know whether to attach or not. But see, they're driven to attach by the attachment center. So they would try to attach, but they would get, scolded or rebuffed or punished or whatever, by their parent. So their parents were not safe. And so they don't know how to attach. They didn't know whether to attach, when to attach or how to attach. And so they are people that are angry. They are people that are angry, and they're angry because why? They could never attach. So they got angry. They are the CEOs, heads of companies. They are salesmen that are very forward and really controlling salesmen. They are doctors that are very controlling. They don't have a good bedside manner. So disorganized people are angry, so that anger drives them to be very, very successful. Here's a way to look at it. You have a disorganized man that has a secretary that is distracted, that has a dismissive accountant that helps his company. Another thing that happens is these groups marry each other. So the dismissive marries the distracted because she's good with people, he's not so good with people. The disorganized marries the distracted because they are the type of person that they can control, and yet they get along with people very well. So the disorganized will look for the distracted to help them in their relationships. So that's really what happens, and that happens in such a way as that if you're not get secure attachment, you end up being a dismissive or a distracted or a disorganized. They're going to be living in attachment pain. So they're going to marry the way they marry. They're going to have the jobs they have in order to be able to because they're in that position of being in those attachment styles. The thing I want you to realize is that attachment pain is real. It causes people to be driven to do things to solve the pain problem, to marry the kind of people that they think will solve the pain problem, to do the kind of work they think will solve the pain problem. And the problem is, it won't solve the pain problem. And that is the reality. So what solves the pain problem is to be able to have emotional connections at a very deep level and to deal with unresolved emotional pain. Now, God has given me, and I know I have a way to be able to help you to be able to have much better